Welcome to my 31 days of summer barbecue. Day 2, tear and share focaccia. Let's get it. Now, great British barbecues are drawn and brought together by one holy thing, and that is bread. Now, this tear and share focaccia is packed full of flavour and is a perfect centrepiece for your British barbecue. The story starts, like with all good bread, water. Now, I'm going to put this into the machine first because I don't want the flour to get stuck to the outside of the machine and alter the recipe, or for me to have to get my hands in there to scrape it down. Now, yeast is a life form. It's a bacteria. It feeds off the sugars in the flour, creates carbon dioxide, and allows that bread to get a beautiful, light, fluffy rise. I'm going to use this little sachet of dried yeast. If you have fresh yeast, you need to double the weight because you're accounting for the amount of moisture, aka water, already in that yeast. Now, focaccia is traditionally semolina flour and strong flour. We've gone just strong flour, but we are keeping the heart of the recipe alive, and that comes in the form of olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil, peppery, grassy, fruity, gives an amazing luxuriousness to this bread. Next up is the flour. I'm using strong white Canadian flour. You're looking for a gluten percentage of about 14 to 16% to make amazing, structured, strong, fluffy bread. Bang that in. After the flour, we just go straight in with that salt. Now, salt is going to bring a beautiful depth of flavour to this bread. Salt is key when we're making bread, so never forget the salt. So we're just going to stick this on speed 1 and allow that dough to come together over the next 5 to 10 minutes. And it's transformed all those individual ingredients into this amazing stretchy dough. All that's left to do now is prove it. You can put it into a pretty ball if you want, but at this stage, while we're proving and while we're going through those levels of fermentation, a bit of cling film over the top is absolutely fine. We're going to leave that to prove in a warm place. Now, this bread has been proving for about 35 to 40 minutes. It's risen, it's warm, there's a slight amount of sort of mist on top of the cling film. It's in its own atmosphere, and that is what we're looking for. So take the cling film off, straight back onto your machine, and then speed 2, just let the machine knock that dough back. Just like that, it's done. It's been mixing now for about a minute, 2 minutes. Take a blue scrape card, just take any excess off of that hook, allow that to drop into the bowl, and then same as before, take your dough, grab your cling film, make sure that's nice and tight, and that's going to go for our second proof. So this dough has had its second proof. It's light, it's fluffy, it's risen. And if you just drag your fingers into it, you'll be able to see this like spider web pattern underneath, where all that carbon dioxide is being released. The yeast is getting nice and strong and doing its work. Now we need to turn this out and shape it. We want our focaccia to be tear and share. That basically means you can pull it apart. So in order to achieve this, we're going to make little bread rolls, put them inside a pan, and then let that prove and bake. So once it's cooked, you can tear that focaccia apart. Let's take the dough with a little bit of flour out of the bowl onto the bench. Now, this dough has got a high hydration level. What does that mean? It means it's got a lot of water in it. The water to flour ratio is worked on percentages in baking. And a high percentage basically means a high hydration. So it's gonna be wet, it's gonna be loose, but with plenty of flour and a quick hand, you can make light work of it. We shape this up into a ball. And the way we do that with flour on our little fingers is just press and tuck the sides underneath that ball. And what you'll eventually end up with is a nice proud ball of dough. Take your knife and we're just gonna cut straight down the middle. A little bit of flour on top and we portion again. Just take them apart, get them all portioned down. You need a good amount of flour in your hand. We're gonna turn these into little tiny bread rolls. To do that, you take a piece of the bench with not much flour on it, you take your dough, you slap it down onto the bench. Then with the palm of your hand, you press. And we're rolling on the bench. Now, if you say the word focaccia, extra virgin olive oil is normally followed pretty close behind. You can't have one without the other. So in this little pie dish, I'm gonna add a good amount of extra virgin olive oil. And this is gonna add like a safety barrier underneath the bread, making sure it doesn't stick, and soaking into that beautiful dough throughout the cooking process. Now with your biggest ball, I'm gonna place that in the middle, and then the rest, just gonna fill up the gaps around the outside. Now at this stage, they're shaped, they're knocked back, and they're ready for their third and final prove. What we want to do to stop a skin developing on the outside of the bread is drizzle a little bit of olive oil all over the top, and then with your hands, just rub that over very gently, glazing it up and protecting that dough from the outside elements. Now just like when I was proving before, I had a bowl with a rim, and that was going to stop the bread sticking to anything else other than the bowl it was in. The cling film wasn't going to inhibit the rise, and it had a lovely environment to prove in. I want to create that again, but this pie dish's walls aren't big enough to stop that bread sticking to the cling film. So instead, we're taking a pan over the top, and that's going to become our prover. Now while our bread is on its final proof, there's a couple of things to make sure we have in place. Now our oven needs to be set between 220 and 250 degrees Celsius, fan assisted, and that will go up or down depending on the strength of your oven at home. And what we want to do is put one of these, a big old thick bottom pan in the bottom of the oven to catch some water and create steam inside the oven. Now what's the steam going to do? It's going to help the temperature of the oven connect to the outside of the bread. It's going to keep the outside of the bread moist, so when it steams it doesn't crack, and also that puff, that rise isn't inhibited by the bread crust going tight and tough, because the water is in there doing its thing, moistening everything up and helping that bread cook. So this goes in the bottom of the oven and we set the oven on. Now what you will notice about our focaccia is we haven't put any rosemary in there yet. Rosemary in focaccia is like an age-old tradition when it comes to making that type of bread. What I don't like is the rosemary on the outside of that bread catching the temperature, becoming bitter, and all the perfume and flavour from those herbs being lost in the oven. So what I like to do is make a rub to go on the outside of the bread as it comes out. So we take our garlic into a blender, good amount of thyme, our rosemary, and last but not least, a good rip of parsley. Now like any good rub, dressing, pesto, it needs a good lubrication, and that's coming in the form of extra virgin olive oil. Give it a blitz. I'm gonna pour that off into a bowl, set that aside until after the cook. Now you can see the yeast has really gone to work on this dough. It's pillowy, it's soft, it's jiggling, it's full of air. A little bit of oil over the top. We're just gonna push our fingers into the bread to create those iconic holes, and last but not least, a good pinch of flaky salt. Now my kettle's boiled, I'm gonna stick that into the oven. Slowly add that kettle of water, and we're gonna wait now about 25 to 30 minutes for a beautiful golden brown crust to appear, and for that focaccia to be fully cooked. Our bread is beautifully baked, golden brown, and has risen into this great pebbly mound with valleys, beautiful notches, and a stunning smell, warm focaccia when it comes out the oven. Now while this is still hot, we want to get our dressing, our rub, our flavor bomb puree, and just spread that all over the top and properly glaze and flavor all of that bread. Just let that cool for about 45 minutes to an hour. You can get this done in the morning for the evening. You can get this done the day before. This bread will keep beautifully for 2 to 3 days. And you can see the iconic round of the focaccia in this beautiful crown shape. And then you just very gently pull that bread apart, and you've got this stunning, warm, soft, pillowy focaccia with the flavor of rosemary, garlic, and thyme that will be a perfect crowned centerpiece for your summer barbecue. That's my perfect focaccia with a rosemary, thyme, garlic, and parsley rub. Thank you.